Clare and Dora Williams had traveled to Washington State to undergo a radical medical treatment. They believed they were going on a wellness holiday where Dr. Linda Hazzard would cure their ailments through a rigid period of fasting. Eventually, the sisters became so emaciated that they could barely function, and by the time family members had come to rescue them, Clare was dead. From there, investigators found a lengthy list of others who had died before her, all at the hands of a doctor who was claiming to make them better. This is Monsters. In February of 1911, sisters Clare and Dorothea Williamson arrived in Seattle to undergo treatment at an exclusive Pacific Northwest sanitarium. Clare and Dora were the daughters of a wealthy British Army officer, and despite their education and having been well-traveled, they were still naive about people who wanted to get their money through scams. They were orphans in their early 30s, and their other two sisters had died of scarlet fever when they were young. So they were traveling the world and visiting what other family members they had left. They took a ship from Liverpool, England to Quebec and then traveled to the West Coast. While staying in the Empress Hotel in Victoria, British Columbia, they saw an ad for a book called Fasting for the Cure of Disease by a Dr. Linda Burfield Hazzard. The book appealed to the sisters because they were constantly looking for new ways to become healthier. They weren't suffering from any serious ailments, but they both believed that they had a variety of more minor medical issues. Dora believed she had swollen glands and complained of joint pain, where Clare believed she had a dropped uterus. By today's standards, they would be seen as hypochondriacs. Their interest in solving their medical conditions had brought them to many health centers and institutions that promised miracle cures, but they still didn't feel completely healthy. They had given up meat and wearing corsets in an effort to feel better, but it wasn't enough. Clare wrote a letter to Dr. Hazzard telling her that Dora's eyes were bloodshot and seemed to be eliminating a good deal of matter. She also explained that Dora's period was 10 days late and that she had a sharp pain over her right temple whenever she moved. 5 days later, Dr. Hazzard's book arrived at the hotel. In it, the doctor explained how every single ailment in the human body was caused by diet and in turn could be cured with fasting. The book stated, "The only disease is in pure blood and its sole cause impaired digestion." The sisters believed that they had finally found the answer to their medical maladies. Clare and Dora had been considering going to a sanitarium owned by Dr. Kellogg of Kellogg's cereal fame, but it was all the way in Michigan. Dr. Hazzard had a facility in Olalla, Washington, just south of British Columbia. In 1898, Linda Hazzard was married to her first husband, Irwin Perry. They had 2 children, Roland and Nina Floy, in a small town in Minnesota. Linda was not happy with the small-town life and left her family to pursue a medical career in Minneapolis, though she claimed later in court documents that Irwin left her and with no support, she sent her children to live with her mother and set out to develop a career. She trained as an osteopathic nurse before discovering the book The Gospel of Health by Dr. Edward Hooker Dewey. Dr. Dewey promoted the therapeutic benefits of fasting and Linda was hooked. She began working under Dr. Dewey, learning everything about the process of fasting to cure illness. Despite Dr. Dewey not being a supporter of internal baths, which is just a fancy name for an enema, Linda believed that the combination of fasting and enemas were the best way to cure diseases. When Dr. Dewey passed away a few years later, Linda opened her own fasting practice. Even though she had no medical degree, she presented herself as Dr. Perry. Her divorce from Edwin was finalized in 1902, and records show she claimed her first victim around the same time. Gertrude Young was in her care, having been promised a cure for the paralysis that she had suffered during a stroke. Dr. Perry had ordered her on a 40-day fast, and on the 21st day, Gertrude awoke in the night, vomiting uncontrollably. Her family called her regular doctor, who told her she needed to break the fast, but she refused. Dr. Perry had assured her that the fast would cure her. On the 39th day of the fast, Gertrude died. When the coroner determined the cause of death was starvation, he tried to have the police bring charges against her. Gertrude's family also noticed that all of her jewelry was missing. Since Dr. Perry hadn't broken any laws and the cause of death was under question, she was never charged with a crime. Shortly after that, Linda met and married a man named Samuel Hazzard. He was a drunk and a swindler who was dishonorably discharged from the U.S. Army after he misappropriated funds. Not only that, but it turned out that Sam had been married twice before, but only divorced once. This led Sam to being charged with bigamy and sentenced to 2 years in prison. Once Sam was released from prison in 1905, Mr. and the now Dr. Hazzard moved to Washington State to start over. They bought a 40-acre lot in a small town called Olalla in Kitsap County. In case you're unfamiliar with the area, it's an hour ferry ride from Seattle, just west of the Puget Sound. Linda started commuting to Seattle to treat patients while she turned her property into a sanitarium she called Wilderness Heights. There's a specific reason that the Hazzards chose Washington as their destination. Medical treatments were becoming more regulated and laws were being created that required doctors to hold a medical degree and be licensed in order to practice medicine. Washington State had grandfathered in a law that allowed practitioners of alternative medicine to obtain licenses to practice. With her experience in osteopathy, this gave Linda Hazzard an opportunity to be a legitimately licensed doctor. While working on building her facility in Olalla, Dr. Hazzard opened a practice in Seattle in 1906 and began treating people using fasting, enemas, and day-long hot baths as treatment. Over the next 4 years, 9 people would die under the care of Dr. Hazzard. One more notable victim was a woman named Daisy Maud Haglund, a Norwegian immigrant whose parents had at one time owned Alki Point. She died in 1908 and left behind a 3-year-old son named Ivar Haglund, who would go on to open one of the most iconic seafood restaurants in the Seattle area. In 1909, a patient named Eugene Stanley Wakelin died from a gunshot wound to the head. Dr. Hazzard had been given power of attorney over his estate, and even though he was the son of a British lord, Eugene himself was not rich. It's speculated that the doctor killed him expecting to gain a substantial amount of money, but it was never proven. Despite telling Dr. Hazzard that they weren't well enough to travel, in the fall of 1910, the Williamson sisters went to Riverside, California to be in warmer weather through the winter. While there, Clare was receiving treatment for her dropped uterus, but after writing to Dr. Hazzard, she received a response telling her to stop the treatment because fasting was the only thing that could cure her. The letter included an invoice for $5 for the advice. When the sisters were ready to travel to Wilderness Heights, Dr. Hazzard gave them the bad news that construction had been delayed over the winter. They opted to stay in Seattle and begin their treatment. They arrived in Seattle on February 26, 1911, and met Dr. Hazzard in person for the first time the next morning. There, she explained the process to the women. Upon arrival, the patient was put on a vegetable diet of 2 meals a day. The next week they would be reduced to 1 meal a day for a few days, then it would be cut down to a small amount of fruit. Soon the patient would be given vegetable broth for 3 days before starting a 45-day fast. During this entire time, the patients would undergo constant, sometimes hours-long enemas. They were also required to constantly walk. Dr. Hazzard told the sisters, "Your bodies are full of poison, you need to walk it out. No matter how difficult it may be as the fast continues, you must persevere and walk. Walk, walk, walk." Of course, the fast didn't stop there. After 45 days, they were allowed to eat some lima bean broth and then they fasted some more. On April 22, 1911, Clare and Dora were transported to Wilderness Heights. They both weighed about 70 pounds, and Dr. Hazzard hired 2 ambulances to take them across the Puget Sound to the newly built sanitarium. Neighbors watched as 2 skeletal forms wrapped in blankets were brought out of the apartment building on stretchers and placed into the ambulances. In the time since the sisters had started their fast, Clare had modified her will to include a $25 monthly stipend to the Hazzard Institute of Natural Therapeutics. The modification also included instructions that, upon her death, she was to be cremated under the supervision of Linda Hazzard. Dora had also given Dr. Hazzard power of attorney. After getting the women into the house in Olalla, Dr. Hazzard split them up. Dora was told that Clare was too weak for visitors, and Clare was told that Dora had gone insane. 17 days after being brought to Wilderness Heights, Clara died of starvation. Only that's not what the autopsy report said she died of, but that's because the autopsy was performed by Dr. Hazzard herself. Unbeknownst to Dr. Hazzard, prior to her death, Clare had secretly sent a telegram to their childhood nanny asking for her to come see them. Margaret Conway was a nursemaid for the Williamson family, and despite Clare and Dora now being adults, she was still close to the girls. When their mother died, Margaret had taken over the mother role, and they felt just as much to her as her own children by now. Margaret arrived in Seattle on June 1st, 1911. She was met by Sam Hazzard and told that Clare had died and that Dora was insane. She was then taken to a mortuary where she was shown an embalmed body that she would later say was not Clare. Sam attempted to keep Margaret from seeing Dora, but after repeated demands, she was finally taken to Wilderness Heights. There she saw Dora, who by now weighed little more than 50 pounds. The emaciated woman initially begged to be taken away, but when Margaret returned the next day, she was no longer willing to leave. Margaret stayed in the attic bedroom of the Hazzards' home and began taking care of Dora. At first, Dr. Hazzard wouldn't allow her to be present during the enemas or to see Dora without clothes, but soon the nurse on site left and Dr. Hazzard allowed Margaret to take over her duties. Margaret knew that Dr. Hazzard's treatment was actually killing Dora, and when nobody was looking, she would add some rice or some flour to Dora's vegetable broth, anything to give her some extra sustenance. Soon, Margaret was able to move into the small cabin where Dora was living by herself. Over time, Dora regained some of her strength and was awoken from the spell that Dr. Hazzard had put on her. After a few weeks, Margaret was approached by another, severely emaciated patient. The woman told Margaret that they were prisoners there and begged her for help. When Margaret informed Dr. Hazzard that she wanted all of Clare's belongings so her and Dora could leave, the doctor told her that Dora couldn't leave. Dr. Hazzard had had the county declare Dora mentally incompetent, and now the doctor had complete guardianship of her. Margaret was able to send a cable message to the girl's uncle in Portland, Oregon, and inform him of the situation. John Herbert arrived at Wilderness Heights and told Dr. Hazzard that he intended to take Dora. She told him that he could, but he would have to settle her bill. Then she handed him an invoice for $2,000 with a remaining balance of $700. That would be like $20,000 today. They argued through the night, and John ended up giving them $500 to settle the bill. As Margaret, John, and Dora boarded the ferry that would take them away from Olalla, a local resident pointed and commented how skinny Dora was. Then a local woman could be heard saying, "That's one of those girls from Starvation Heights." It turned out that the residents of Olalla had given the sanitarium their own name, and this one was much more fitting. John and Margaret reported the situation to the British Vice Consul in Tacoma, Washington, not only to get justice for Clare and Dora, but to try to save the other prisoners trapped and starving to death under Dr. Hazzard's care. The first order of business was to regain control of Dora's guardianship and Clare's estate. In court, Dr. Hazzard tried to finagle her way into keeping control of both, but her paperwork didn't add up, and finally, the lawyer she claimed was hired by the Williamson sisters confessed that he never was. The court ordered the guardianship voided and all possessions once belonging to the Williamsons to be returned to Dora. The vice consul pressured the Kitsap County District Attorney to prosecute Linda Hazzard. The district attorney initially said they couldn't afford it. The small county across the Sound from Seattle did not have the resources. Despite a young woman being murdered in the county, money was the reason she was going to get away with it. In order to get justice for her sister's murder, Dora offered to pay for all of the costs associated with trying Dr. Hazzard with the crime. In August of 1911, an arrest warrant was issued for Linda Barfield Hazzard for the murder of Clare Williamson. During the investigation into Dr. Hazzard while preparing for her trial, it was discovered that local authorities knew the so-called doctor well. In May of 1911, authorities were alerted that a man was starving to death under the care of Dr. Hazzard. That man was Lewis Emerson Rader, who had served in the Washington House of Representatives until 1899. He had sought treatment from the fasting doctor for a stomach issue and ended up dying after 29 days of fasting. The health department at the time didn't have the authority to do anything about the reports because the doctor was licensed to practice her form of treatment. Dr. Hazzard had performed the autopsy on Lewis Rader, and she cited his cause of death as stomach prolapsus. It seemed that the good doctor would starve her patients to death, do the autopsy, and then use the condition of the internal organs as the cause of death. But the conditions of the internal organs were caused by starvation. Was she intentionally lying, or did she just know that little about how starvation worked? Nobody would know for sure. It would seem coincidental that all of the patients who died under her care were of a wealthier class, and she tended to create paperwork that would give her access to their money. The Williamson sisters and Lewis were brought to Olalla in secret, and Dora and Lewis's bodies were removed under the same secrecy. She didn't want people to know that they had been at Starvation Heights. It was also discovered that Lewis Rader had once owned some of the property that became Linda Hazzard's, and it's possible his death released her from a debt. I think she knew exactly what she was doing to an extent. It would be her final victim who would make it obvious that she believed that fasting was a valid cure-all. The record showed that Dr. Hazzard had caused at least 15 deaths while practicing her fasting therapy. 2 of those deaths happened after Linda Hazzard's trial. 3 of the death certificates had been written by outside doctors instead of by Dr. Hazzard herself, and they listed starvation as the cause of death. Linda Hazzard was arrested on August 5, 1911, at her home in Olalla. At the time of her arrest, she had a young blind boy at her facility who had been fasting for 3 weeks with the goal of restoring his eyesight. Through fasting. Yeah. During the trial, Dr. Hazzard claimed that she was being persecuted because she was a woman and other doctors didn't like her natural methods. The prosecutor presented a letter that was sent to Clare Williamson's bank requesting funds in the amount of $1,005 be sent directly to Linda Hazzard. That letter was dated April 22nd, but the bank sent the funds directly to Clare, and it seemed that the doctor and her husband weren't aware of this because on May 26th, Sam Hazzard stormed into a bank branch in Seattle and demanded to know why they hadn't gotten their money. Well, Clare had died on May 18th, and when the cashier he confronted was questioned, he said that Sam hadn't made any mention of it. It was almost as if Sam wanted the cashier to believe she was still alive. On top of that, on June 4th, Sam used the questionable power of attorney to withdraw $539.10 from Clare's account. Dora's testimony was also quite damning. She described the diet of a thin vegetable broth and occasional fruit juice, the constant enemas, the day-long baths, the excessive exercise, and the violent pounding massages. Linda Hazzard used the fact that she was looking healthy as proof that the fasting worked, ignoring the fact that stopping her ridiculous and dangerous treatment was the reason Dora looked better. Dora then described the numerous financial transaction slips she signed yet never received any money for. On February 4, 1912, Linda Barfield Hazzard was found guilty of manslaughter. The jury first voted for first-degree murder but couldn't reach a unanimous decision. Instead, they agreed on manslaughter. Linda yelled to the press that she was the victim and being persecuted, but for the first time in their relationship, Sam grabbed her arm and told her to shut up. He loved his wife and didn't want her doing any more damage. Linda made a statement during sentencing, saying, "I can only say that I have not had a thought of doing anything wrong and that a great injustice has been done to me. It only takes time, of course, to right all these matters." With that, the judge sentenced her to 2 to 20 years in prison. Linda Hazzard wasn't sent straight to prison, though. She was released on bond while she awaited an answer to her appeal. During this time, 2 more women would die under the instruction of Linda Hazzard, Mary Bailey and Ida Anderson. Linda was tried for those deaths, but since the district attorney believed that she would already be going to prison for her past crimes, he didn't really push the issue. Released once again, it was eventually learned that a wealthy British man was in the midst of the fasting process. Luckily, he was able to make it away from Starvation Heights with his life. In the last days of 1913, Linda Hazzard had lost her appeals and was ordered to the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla, Washington. On December 19, 1915, almost exactly 2 years after walking into prison, Linda Hazzard walked out a free woman. The following year, Governor Ernest Lister gave her a full pardon in exchange for her agreement to leave the country. She and Sam moved to New Zealand, where she worked as a dietitian and osteopath until 1920. In 1917, she was charged in Auckland under the Medical Practitioners Act for practicing medicine while not registered to do so. She was found guilty and fined a whopping £5. In 1920, she moved back to Olalla, Washington, where she opened a new sanitarium called the School of Health. Since she no longer had a medical license, she claimed that she was operating a school and she would call her patients students. She continued her starvation treatments for 15 more years, even receiving legal reprimands for practicing without a license. It didn't stop her from starving people, though, and many more people died under her care. In 1925, Leonard Ritter paid to attend the quote-unquote school, where he fasted for 84 days, going from 168 to 100 pounds. He died as a result. The authorities came after Linda Hazzard and she was fined $100. No jail time. In 1935, the sanitarium burned down and was never rebuilt. 3 years later, in 1938, Linda Hazzard claimed her final victim. She wasn't feeling well, so she began a fasting cure on her own. At the age of 70, it didn't take long for her to succumb to starvation. She died on June 24, 1938. She believed that fasting was the only thing that would cure her illness, but in reality, like the rest of her victims, it was what killed her. Thanks for watching This Is Monsters. New episodes are uploaded twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays. There are occasional bonus episodes covering unsolved cases and criminal history. If you have a suggestion for a case you think I should cover, leave it in the comments. You can always follow the channel on Instagram at thisis_monsters and purchase merch at thisismonsters.com. Thanks so much, and be safe.